We have already talked about how Traefik updates its dynamic configuration and its internal rules based on the container labels that it reads from the stack. This video is going to be a more practical video. We're going to start from a system which only has Docker installed, and then we will deploy this over here, which is just the base components of the architecture. So that will be Traefik and Portainer. All right, in order to do this, we have already written a guide here. So this should be the guide over here, and we are going to follow this exactly. Now you can see this guide starts with SSH into your server and install Docker. We are going to do this uh, probably on the development server when we deploy them in production and for real. And we're going to only do this once, because once we have these base components, we will not touch them again. This is just a video for reference and how to do it if something goes really bad. Okay, I'm gonna do this on my local host. I'm not gonna SSH into any other server. So first I'm gonna verify my install of Docker. Right, it looks like it works. It says that my installation is working correctly. Then we're gonna create a cluster. Again, a cluster is just this grouping of nodes. In this case, of course, we're going to have only this node over here, so only a singular node, because I don't have multiple computers to connect to this cluster. So you will have to do. So you can see if I do Docker node list and I try to list the nodes, it says this node is not a swarm manager. And using this command, we're going to make it a swarm manager. If you wanted to have multiple computers in this swarm, you would just use this command over here. Right, so now we have to create that overlay network, which we talked about in the previous video by running this command. We'll also have to create a network for all of the agents of Portainer. I don't think we have talked about Portainer very much, but just for a quick recap, it's very simple. It's just a nice graphical interface to Docker Swarm where you can see all of your stacks, your services, your containers, your images, and everything else. This over here, this network will be used by Portainer in order to collect information across the cluster for its different containers. Right, then we should clone this repository. This repository essentially contains all of the guides, and it will also contain all of the stacks for all of our applications that we will deploy. That's amazing. Right, this is, so it's asking me for authentication. My bad, this is because it's over HTTPS. Where it should have been over SSH. Right. So now we're going to self-sign some SSL certificates in order for Traefik to use these SSL certificates. In a production environment, we wouldn't do this. We already have SSL certificates, but just for demonstration purposes, and if you want to run this on your local host, you have to self-sign certificates. Right, so essentially this just creates our certificates over here. You can see that now we have two new files. We have to create Docker configs for each of these, because that's how Traefik will know. So the Traefik container will know how to get them. So now you can clearly see that we have configurations for our SSL certificates, which we just self-signed over here. And this is essentially our stack file for Traefik, which we will deploy. And you can see over here that it mentions the fact that there should be a provider here. This provider, so we're essentially just giving it a file name, which is this file name over here. It has a different name because it goes through a config over here. So we're essentially just giving it a file name, which then it will read. It will be this file name over here. And then from here, it will be able to read these certificates and install them into the Traefik instance so it can go over HTTPS. All right. So after we've done this, I have already verified that we have all of these. We should set the host name. This is essentially every single environment variable that you have will be, I think it's better if we look inside of the base, Traefik, inside of the stack over here. You can see that the host will be Traefik.hostname, and this is an environment variable. Whenever I will deploy this stack, it will replace this environment variable with whatever I export here. I'm going to export it to be this. I'll go inside of the base, and then I will deploy the base.sh. Deploy base.sh, I will actually not run the script. I will instead show you what the script does so it's more clear. The script goes in here and it runs docker stack deploy. It runs this and then it goes inside of Portainer and it runs this. So it essentially just deploys both stacks. Great. Now looking back over our diagram over here, this is what we should have right now. You can inspect and look at each of the stacks and see that we define these entry points. And you can also read up on the documentation and see, for example, the Portainer will define a certain label which will inform Traefik to route uh, all of the requests to it if the host looks like this. Um, let's see if this demo actually works. So I will try here. It's going to tell me that this is not a secure HTTPS because I just self-signed some certificates. We're going to proceed and it will log me in. It didn't ask me for a password, but it usually does. I just entered the password before. That's why the passwords are test, and that should be written right there. And in here, I can see the providers. So this means that Traefik is watching over Swarm in order to detect new containers. And if I look in HTTP over here, I can see the routers or all of the containers that it currently detects. Let's also access Portainer. Right, it tells me to set up a new user. So again, this is just a nice UI in order to be able to interact with everything that has to do with our cluster. You can see our cluster over here. It has 2 stacks running, 3 services, 4 containers, 1 volume for images, 12 CPU, whatever. So you can connect to it. You even have a cluster visualizer. Here you can see the containers running. There's also, you can see the stacks, and then from here on, we will use this. For example, in order to deploy a new stack, we will do add stack, and then we can go and select a certain file over here, our environment variables, and just this won't work right now because I don't have the environment variables. But for a quick demo, this should be. Over here, we're going to select the stack, and then over here, we're going to select the environment variables. And again, I told you we don't have environment variables. I could make it such that at least we have some dummy environment variables. There we go. So it would look something like this, and then we would press on deploy the stack. And we also have to give it a certain name. We would press on this. I don't know if it will work because the environment variables are really valid. Yes, it deployed, but of course the applications wouldn't work. And here we can go and visualize. It's taking quite a long time for loading. This is because of the networking things that are going on right now. Um, so here you can see that this stack mentioned two different services. This stack is essentially the one in the diagram we showed here initially. It looks something like this. So it mentions two services, and Portainer just allows you to look at each service and inspect, for example, its environment variables or other different details. Okay, that's enough.